Where I want to focus this morning is, with that in mind, verses 14 and 15. But every man, when he is tempted, okay, and the idea of being tempted is that test or that of soliciting to sin. When we look at that, that's the concept here. That's the idea. When we are tempted, when we are drawn away, we'll talk more about that here in a second, to sin. That's the idea here. Everyone is done that way, not by who doesn't do that, who doesn't tempt us to sin. God doesn't tempt us to sin, but rather when he is drawn away. All right, when he's drawn away from the right thing to do the wrong thing is the idea here of his what? His own lust. And that's important for us to remember, that it is our own lust. Oftentimes, your kids may look at you, and by the way, it's good to have our young people in here with us this morning. I understand you're not normally in here, so thank you for being a part of this, whether you want it to be or not. Thanks for coming, all right? But we're drawn away by our own lusts. Our own lusts. My kids can't tell me, well, the devil made me do it. Okay? The devil, yes, his cohorts are out there, and we understand all of that. But the fact of the matter is the text tells us right here that a major problem here is our own lusts. And what's a lust? Very good. Desire. It's a desire that we have. The way I often like to explain that, it's kind of like our firmware if you're into computers. It's already programmed into us. We are already prone to sin, to go after our own desires, go in our own direction. And that is what is going to be pulling at us. We look at it here, it says we're drawn away by our own lust, and we are enticed. What does the word enticed mean? Do you have any idea there? I could throw a bunch of Greek words at you, but tempted, what? The Mormons? Okay. Allurement. Oh, okay. I thought you said the Mormons, and I was thinking, boy, how do I work that in and make him feel good about himself? All right, but no. Yeah, you're right. It's that allurement, all right? And he's also enticed. The word enticed, what is that talking about again? It's a temptation. It is a lure. It's a hunting and fishing concept of being lured. And I could tell you all kinds of hunting stories, but I would never get done with the lesson if I went through all of that. I understand that a number of you like to fish. Some of you young people, Jeremy, what's a lure? Do you know what a lure is? No? Okay, well, that's fine. I shouldn't pick on you. I shouldn't call on you, but you're the only name I'm remembering right now. What is a lure? Okay, and it's what? It's usually, bait, shiny. You take it, and for us, I'm a budget. We have a curse. We do not do well fishing. If you're fishing and everybody is catching fish here, if I join you, the fish are gone. They are just going to leave. But you want to use that lure. Sometimes it's a shiny lure. It flashes in the water so that it draws that fish out. So what's going on here is I already have my built-in lusts, my built-in desires. I have going on out there that there are these lures, there's things that are enticing me, that are going to be coming toward me, that I have an appetite for, is the idea here, that are going to try to draw me in. What happens next when we look at the text? We're lured, we're brought into this. Then when lust hath conceived, all right? Idea here, remembering my audience, it's that idea that it's a grasp, it's a hold onto, it's making its own life, is what is happening here. So I have these desires that don't really want to go in line with God. I'm pulled with these other lures that are out there to sin and to feed those appetites and feed those desires. And then when I start following after that, it brings on a life of its own, does it not? And the text goes on to say here then that when lust hath conceived, it brings forth sin. And so I'm thinking about it, and I've got that right there, that temptation that is there. And it's there in front of me, and then I start to act on that, and then I end up doing what? Sinning. I end up doing things that God doesn't want me to do. And then when I sin, and when sin is finished, what does it do? It brings forth death. Do I die the minute I sin? No, that's not what it's talking about. I actually think that what's talking about here, when you have life, it's almost like it brings in a stillborn into the relationship. It is, I think, the concept here. So that when I do give into those temptations that I already have an appetite for, and I bite the lure and I grab a hold of the jig or whatever it is that's out there, and then I'm pulled in and then I begin to sin, and that continues to develop, and I get to the point where now it's breaking up relationships. Relationships between ourselves, more importantly, our relationship with God. And that's what's going on here in this text. When we look at this passage in its entirety, and James 1:14 through 15, we would say that James 1:14 through 15 is about what? How would you fill in that blank then? After what we've just shortly kind of discussed a little bit here, what would we say that is going on in James 1:14 and 15? Sources of temptation? Okay. It's a battle. It's a path. Okay, progression. It's the consequence of sin. And you're combining it. I like the word there with the idea that it is a progression. Would you think that we could say that this is the progression of sin? We have these built in, so to speak, we're born sinners, the Word of God tells us. That those now start to play on us, and we start to feed those, and then it goes from this to this, and then from this to this, and then from this to this. Is that fair, do you think, to look at this text and say that's what's going on here? You have this idea, this progression of sin, it develops into these things. I think that's a good way to summarize the text that's going on, or what's going on here in this text. Why do you think that God would give to us that information? Warning. Warning for what? Okay. Okay, good. So we're not deceived. Okay. Good. Who? I'm sorry? I heard something from back here first. Guidance? Guidance how? Okay, good. Okay, all right, good. And I know you're trying, okay, what is Dan trying to say? What is he thinking? And that's a hard game to play with me, all right? And so when we look at this, I think we're all on the right track when it comes to the idea here. But I think that when we realize that God has given us this process of sin, I think He gives it to us in a sense so that we can stop it sooner rather than later. Okay? He doesn't want us to get down to that very end row of where there is death. Death in that relationship between you and God. Not saying that you lose your salvation, but looking at this and saying, listen, I'm having problems. God and I are we're miles apart here. Or in a relationship between a husband and a wife, between a parent and a child. We're way apart from one another because I've allowed these sins, or I've allowed, this to progress. And so I think God gives this so that we can stop it sooner rather than later. I mean, how many times have we found ourselves wishing, man, I wish I would have stopped it back there, and now it almost feels too late. It's kind of like the car going over the cliff. Should have got those brakes checked. It's almost too late now because the car is going over. And I think that when we look at this passage, we understand God is saying, listen, I don't want you to get to that point. I don't want to get you to the point where you feel like I can't turn around, there's nothing left, I've blown it, I've lost everything. When you talk about here it being drawn away and enticed, we find ourselves, how did I get into this? Okay? Understand, last night I was talking to Brother Fink this morning, and he was saying, yeah, you probably preached your sermon to yourself about 9 times last night. Yes, I was going through this and thinking of all the illustrations that I could use. You're going to have to do some of that hard work and putting in there, what is that enticement that is there for you? What is it that's inside of your self that is saying, listen, this is my weakness. This is the sin that so easily besets me. And you're going to have to think this kind of through. I'm going to give you some illustrations to help out with that. But sometimes when we've got to realize that as we're going down there are going to be those things that draw us in and cause us to sin. Maybe this will help. I have my own issues. My wife will tell you I have my many issues, all right? And God would say I have many, many issues that I have to deal with. One of the issues that I have to deal with this weekend is I have a weakness of wanting the applause of men. You know, the fact of the matter is, I want you guys to like me, all right? And I don't know, we'll talk about is there anything wrong with that or not? But I have to start looking at what am I doing? Am I doing things because I want to please man or because I want to please God? There's something within me already that wants your approval, okay? And if I start going down this road, I can be enticed, maybe drawn to people who pat me on the back, say, oh, that was a good job, Pastor, that was a good message. But you know what really trips me up in the end is when I can have 10 people come through the door, 9 say good job, and 1 say, you know, I really didn't agree with that one point. What do you think I think about all afternoon? That one point. Okay? Do you understand when I start to be drawn away, I start going after my own desires and I'm entangled in those types of things. I'm drawn away and I can become feeling as if though I'm powerless. We use a word today when we start getting that way, when we're pulled away, when we're enticed, when we're lured, when we're caught. We'll use maybe a modern term today would be that we would call that a what? It starts with an A. Again, I know you're playing the Dan game. What is he thinking? A-D. Okay, you've heard it before. You can't answer. Addictions. We call it addictions. We get addicted then to that. And that's why I say I get addicted to the applause of men. Okay? That's what I want to hear. That's what I'm wanting in my life. And what we've got to do is if I don't get this under control, I feel like I'm out of control. And then I'm running around always concerned about what everybody thinks. And I can't please everybody. Okay? And so I've got to realize here's what's going on in this process of this sin. And I think it's God's grace that shows us here's the process. Okay? You've got this within you. You get drawn away, you're enticed, and then that brings forth sin, and then sin can really ruin that relationship. Because now I'm not relying on God anymore. I'm relying on who? Dan. Yeah. I'm relying on myself, my own talents, my own abilities, and hoping it's enough to make you like me. All right? And so this process of sin, I don't want to get out of control. I want to make sure that I'm not caught, and I don't want that death that's coming into my life. And so I've got to look at this in reverse. If I don't want the death, if we don't want the feelings like we're being drawn away, like we're being enticed or we're being lured in, we have to come back to the key word in this passage, and that is what is going on in my heart. And so when I think about that, what's going on in my heart, it's the significant source of all of this. And what do we see that significant source is? Or I would look at this as kind of the key word of this text. You'll find I'll narrow it down, verse 14. It's my own, what? My lust. It's my desires. I've got to realize what is going on in my own heart. If you're not going to get ensnared, if you're not going to be lured away, you have got to be able to look at this with God's help and being able to realize what are my lusts? What are my desires? And I've got to look at that and I've got to analyze that. Now, are all desires, lusts wrong? Okay, you say no. Why? Prove that to me. Okay, God will give you the desires of your heart. For me, I think of 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. For the individual who desires the office of a bishop, a overseer, a pastor, he desires a good thing. Okay, it's the same word that is used here in our text is used there. And so I desire to be a pastor. That is something I have a lust for. And so lust is not always wrong. It can be a good thing in a situation like that. But I've got to understand that in this context, what he is talking about, what James is trying to point out here, God doesn't do this to you, people that I'm writing to. But what happens is you have your own lust. You have your own desires of what you want to have. And as we read the context, we realize that there are those desires that are not always right, that are wrong, that are sinful. And so I've got to look at this and say, okay, what is really going on in my heart? Because a lot of times what we want to do is we want to deal with the symptoms. All right? If we take let's just say a husband and wife relationship, okay, and there's arguing and yelling at each other and that type of thing, we want the yelling and the anger, knock that off, stop doing that. But we really need to get below that, don't we? What do we need to find out? What's going on, the cause, or what's going on in my heart? Okay, what's going on inside of me? Why am I acting this way? What is the characteristic of my heart? What am I wanting? What do I want so bad that I end up sinning to be able to get that? Okay? We want to stop the sin, but in order to do that, we've got to realize what's going on in our heart and take care of that. Does that make sense so far? All right, I hope so. Now, as we realize this, God also tells us that we need to keep our heart with all diligence, okay? We need to protect this. We need to guard this is the idea there. And in the Hebrew, the way that is talking about that there is you need to give all diligence to that. Above all, you've got to guard this. Why? Because out of this desire, out of this heart, out of this way of thinking come do you remember what the text says there in Proverbs? The issues of life. These issues of life. In other words, the beginning of where I'm going to start heading down in life. I've got to guard that. And so when I start, sometimes if we were able to, let's just take and have a video of your last conflict with your spouse or with your parents, teacher, whatever, you fill in the blank there. And we were to take it and we were able to show it on one of the screens up here. We would probably be able to see where the desires of your heart are starting to come out. You know, maybe a guy has been working hard. It's now Saturday. He ends up having to work Saturday morning as well, and he gets home Saturday afternoon. And the wife has been thinking, hey, this is my day. I was wanting to go shopping. And now you won't let me go because now you want to sit down and what's the football team you all watch around here on Sundays? The Ravens. Okay, we'll go with the Ravens, all right? Wait a minute. Now we've started a church split. Now, what is it that you want? What's the problem? And but we look at our heart, and so the guy said, "No, I want to watch football." Well, I wanted to go out and go shopping. I need a break from these kids. Anything wrong with getting a break from the kids? No. Anything wrong with watching football? Some of you say if you're pulling for the Ravens, yes, whatever. But we look, no, not necessarily is there something going wrong. Wrong with that. We need to get below the surface and find out, as the text is telling us, what is your own lust? What is it that you are wanting so that you are sinning and acting the way that you are towards your spouse? Well, it may be that I want my way. I need my time. I want to be appreciated. I want her to understand how hard I've worked. I want them to and so we start having all of these underlying issues that are going on in our heart. Maybe what we can do is we can illustrate it this way, is to think, listen, I want, let's just take, because of our age groups in here, I want good grades. All right? Anything wrong with wanting to have good grades? No. What might make that wrong? Okay, how you go about it. A little example, cheating. Okay, you want to cheat, so you go about it that way. What else could make wanting the good grades to be what you're all about? You're proud. Can you give me a little more on that about being proud? In what way? Okay. Okay. Envy. Boy, you really got this down, don't you? All right, go. But it is. It is. We get that way. We want, I want maybe the approval of others. Okay? That can become the issue. It can be about, maybe it's, I feel like I want to be able to compete with others and hold my own. I want people to prove, to prove to people that I have what it takes in life, and I want them to see me as smart and successful. Maybe we just simply get to focusing all on myself. Okay? And this is what is that underlying issue. So again, you're going to have to find out what your lust is, what's going on, the desire of your heart. How am I going to have to work through this? What is it that I'm wanting? And then deal with that. Maybe you can illustrate it this way. All right, let's back up and let's talk about what should my desires be? What should I be desiring to have? Relationship with the Lord, finding God's will. Maybe we can do it this way. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 9. Somebody want to read that for me? 2 Corinthians 5:9. Go ahead. Just read it out. Yeah, I'm not picky. All right. Accepted of him. What do we know what the word accepted means? What's the meaning? What's behind that? Okay, pleasing. I'm wanting to please God. With the word itself is talking about that. Above, I want to be pleasing. I want to be found pleasing to God. So we could look at this and say, all right, one of my desires ought to be, we could put 2 Corinthians, let's see if we can get a better one here, 5:9, and we could summarize that by saying pleasing to God. Could we not? All right, so I need to be pleasing God. 1 Corinthians 10:31, what does that say? Whether you're therefore you eat or drink, do all to the, all right, glory of God. So what ought to be a desire of my heart? Glorify God, all right? So we want to be glorifying to God. Can you see that back there? Good. And if you could, you can't read it anyway, all right, because I'm a sloppy writer. All right, what about Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29? What does that tell us? We know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. All right? And then verse 29, we often forget to tack that and read that in the text. What does it say? All right, so what in that text should be, according to that text, should be a desire of mine? To be Christ-like. All right, very good. So we want to be, let me put Romans 8:28 through 29. We want to be, okay, can I just put like Christ? Is that okay? Thanks. All right, and so we want to be like Christ. Now, when it comes to my grades, all right, you gave me a whole list of things here, of things that, these are the good things here. Maybe now some of the things where it starts to cross the line and to leave this is, you said, we could say pride, selfishness, boasting, envying. Okay, you get the idea, okay? And that's what can end up happening. That's what we want happening in our lives, or what we're desiring. And that's when it starts to come into conflict. If I want to take Dan's problem in looking at that I want the applause of men, what's really the issue there? Say, I don't. Okay, good. Yeah, my focus, I want the applause of men as opposed to God, and so you're getting down the road ahead of me. That's great. Because because Dan has been dealing with this all of his life, it ends up being a pride issue. I'm proud. I want to be recognized as I do a good job, okay? And so the way we can understand this, and let's use the red one for this, What is that? All right, good. I'm glad you recognize that. What's that? Okay, good. Or we could even say that's a fancier chair. Throne. All right, good. A throne. That's my throne. What? Yeah, an H. That's what I was afraid you were going to say. Thanks. I appreciate it. You're showing off my artistic ability here. Yes, on my H throne here, all right, what I want to have ruling here is what? Christ. Or what should my desire be? To be Christ-like, to be glorifying to God, to be pleasing to God. It really then shouldn't matter to me what you think of me, okay? And you understand the way I say that. It means I don't get up here and just, half-cocked and just, off the, shooting from the hip and that type of thing. I need to do my work. But in reality, what I want to be when I leave today is I want this to be here on the throne of my heart, okay? But if I allow the lust, which is pride, and I allow the allurement that some people do like me, that I will feel rejected if I don't, and I start letting that rule, what happens then is that this comes up here, and that goes off the throne, and this now is on the heart throne. Does that make sense? How do I know? Because is it wrong for me to want you to like me? No. Okay. Is it wrong, we've already said, to make good grades? Is it wrong to have a break? I mean, you play the video of the last conflict you were in. Okay. What was climbing up on this throne? Were you allowing the lusts of your heart, the desires of your heart, to stay on the throne? Your desire ought to be this, correct? But when we allow this to come up on the throne, is that pleasing to God? According to our text, what's going to happen? Death in the end. It's going to be a relational death of maybe between you and your spouse. Going to be a relational issue of death between you and God in the sense that you two are at odds because you're allowing these other things to compete to be on the throne of your heart. Does that make sense? How do I know if I've allowed, if these are the bad thoughts, the bad desires that are up on my heart's throne? You hope. Yeah. Okay. Okay. But even in the heat of the moment, though, Mark? Okay. So, and I agree with you, and thank you for picking on my sin. But I mean, how do I know if I've crossed the line?
The reactions that come out are sinful.
Okay, good. That would be my point number 2. How am I responding when God says no? How am I responding when I don't get my way? I didn't get to go shopping. I didn't get to watch football. I didn't get the A on the exam. How do I respond to that? And if I'm responding in a way that is sinful, then I'm pretty sure that this is what has climbed up onto this throne. And exactly like what Mark said, you start going down that road, and pretty soon I'm ready to compromise the truth because I want people to like me. I don't want to run anybody off. I don't want to stand up and say, "Thus saith the Lord," because that might offend you. It is. And that's exactly what this text is telling us. This is the progression that you're going to make. And this is what you see a lot of times in counseling with couples, the progression. They've gone so far down that road because I want what I want, and I'm not happy because I'm not getting what I want. And so we start arguing and yelling and the cold shoulder, and you've got your fill in the blank thing. Or with a neighbor, a coworker. Okay? And before you know it, you're down that path. Is there another indicator of when that may be the wrong thing that's on my heart? All right, the fruit that comes out, maybe I can summarize it this way. It's what I'm willing to sin. I'm willing to sin to get what I want. Okay? Your attitude. Mm-hmm. All right. You're not going to let me go shopping, then fine, I'm not talking to you for the rest of the day. And we got the cold shoulder, and you could store meat in there, it's so cold. Okay? And again, when siblings, when they start arguing and they start fighting and, start hitting one another, or they start doing this type of thing, we realize, wait a minute, something is wrong at that heart level. And we need to start dealing with that issue. Okay? Because if we don't, we have a life of problems with that. This explains, but it doesn't excuse why I have issues of wanting the applause of men. Okay? I grew up in a home where my dad was more of a guilt-driven parenting style. If you love me, you'll do this. Okay? And there was always that pressure to be pleasing to him. And honestly, as I've parented and our kids, it was something that I had to work on, didn't always have success on. The kids started getting, the boys particularly started getting older, and they were going to go wash the car. I was the guy that said, you missed this spot, right? Did you not see that? Look at all the dirt right there on that fender. They're 7 years old. And so I start developing that within them to find favor from me, and I start feeling that way as I get older as from God. I got to do all these things to get you to like me. And if I don't do them, then you're not going to like me. Is that biblical? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so those desires can be developed, that lust can continue to be developed. And if you keep feeding that, it just gets stronger and stronger. And it's easily enticed, it's easily lured away, it's easily then starts conceiving, and then starts bringing forth sin, and then starts bringing forth death. And so we really have to work on that. Does that make sense? And so, again, you play back the videos in your life of just this past week, okay? I am not a patient individual, and it really comes out when I drive. I don't know why I'm airing all my dirty laundry in front of you this morning, but I have to, why? I got to tell you, I like being in control. And there are just some times when God says, no, you're not in control. I'm in control of you. Okay? And I have to let God lead in my life. But I don't want this sickness. And God looks at you, and your desire is not wrong to want to be healthy, is it not? How do I know if I cross the line? Interactive church. You can make that a priority in your life. You can blame God. It comes out in the reaction, doesn't it? Here's what I'm going to do. If I don't get my way, how am I responding to this? Now, that doesn't mean if I go to the doctor next week and I find out that I have cancer and it's terminal, and that doesn't mean that I'm not sad and I just go through, oh, yeah, okay, great, God. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a sense of, God, I want you to be in control. And I am trusting you to do that. And so I think God is very gracious when he gives us a text like this to help us understand what the progression is so that we can get it and nip it in the bud, so to speak, before we allow it to get all that way down to death. Because God doesn't do this to us to make you trip up, see if you're going to sin. It's already coming from my lust. Make sense? And so I need to make sure these would be good verses to memorize so that when you're in the heat of the moment, Why am I getting so frustrated standing in this line at Walmart and I'm ready to choke somebody? I mean, this is everyday life, is it not? And where we live. And I mean, am I to be following what Christ wants me to do? Am I pleasing to God with my attitude? Am I glorifying God right now? Am I being like Jesus? Okay. When it's siblings arguing and fighting and wanting their way, and see, parents, this is where parenting is tough work. Because now you start to look at this and you want them to, it's more than just knock it off. Sit still. Don't do that. I've got to get to the bottom line and say, okay, what's really helping them understand what's the heart issue here? Well, I want my way, don't we all? And I understand they're kids, you're working through that, but it's teaching them those principles. Listen, I want to be like Jesus. I want to please God in what I do. Is that what's happening here? And as adults, we need to do the same thing. Maybe when it comes to our, using our main illustration of the grades in school, maybe it would be something like this: Lord, I confess that I want the grades too much because I want the praise and the approval of others. Please help me to focus on honoring you instead of pleasing others. Galatians 1:10 tells us that we are his servants. Lord, I'm tempted to crave the pleasure of performance so that I have something to boast about, so that I feel like I can compete with others and hold my own. But Lord, your word says that even the wise man should not boast in his own wisdom. Remember Jeremiah? But we ought to boast in what? The Lord, boasting in him, knowing his understanding. Lord, I want to prove to people that I have what it takes to make it in life. I want others to see me as successful and smart. But even one of the smartest men in history didn't put confidence in his intelligence and achievements. Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 through 6. Whenever Paul could have used to make himself noteworthy in the world's eyes, he just discarded that. I don't want that. I want to be pleasing to you. Lord, your Son, Jesus, is the embodiment of wisdom and knowledge. And I understand that if I focus more on myself than on him, but all things were created for Christ. Do you understand? This is where we start to look at those issues that are going on in my life. And again, we could take another month of Sundays to get into the specifics of each one of these, of why there's conflict between you and your spouse, or between you and your, the office mate or cubicle partner, or whatever it may be, your neighbor. What is it that I'm wanting so bad that I'm willing to sin? Lord, help me with that. Aren't you, though, thankful for Galatians chapter 5 and verse 20? What does that say? You guys put that up real quick for Galatians 5:20. I'm sorry, you did the right thing. I want Romans 5:20. I was saying, that's not it. Romans 5:20. All right, can you beat the computer guys back there? Moreover, the law entered, that the offense might abound. In other words, the law came in and showed me how sinful I really am. But where sin abound, grace what? Did much more abound. Aren't you glad for that? I am. I am, because I fail so much, so often. But I'm grateful for the grace of God that forgives. The Bible says that the just man falls how many times and gets back up? 7 times. Or the just man, he falls down, gets back up. All right? Where God is gracious. And I'm so thankful that he works with us to get victory in these areas. So if you're sitting here saying, man, you don't understand the conflicts we've been going through lately in our house, I am so glad there is not that video showing of what's been going on in our house this week. Maybe you feel hopeless. Maybe you're here as a student wanting to make those grades, and you're starting to realize, I'm doing this all for myself and not for the glory of God. God is willing to forgive, and he will forgive, and to cleanse us from just a little bit of our unrighteousness, right? All of our unrighteousness. And we're able to move forward, and God continues to work with us. But let's not lose sight of that progression that happens. Let's nip it in the bud earlier before the car goes over the cliff and let's get the brakes checked. And let's let God, let's let these things reign in the heart of our lives. Make sense? Questions, comments, clarifications? Father, thank you for your word. I thank you that you love us enough that you've given us instruction like this. And Lord, even as we continue to talk about this in the service to follow, I pray that we would be honest with ourselves, that we would allow you to rule and reign in our hearts and to have complete authority. In Christ's name,